Okay, let's see. Looks like we're connected. All right, let's do something fun. Yesterday I did a video on the rise of death cults, which is just something I've been thinking about. But actually, in truth, I was thinking about that problem in association with the collapse of civilization when I was writing my novel. The novel is called It Was 100 Days. It's linked in the description, available on Amazon. So we're going to do something a little bit fun today. I was even thinking about mentioning the part of my novel that sort of deals with death cults, although it doesn't really. I might even go back in a second edition and put in something specifically about that. What the book does have in it, though, are zombie cannibals. And some of the logic as to the occurrence of groups of people who are essentially zombie cannibals. Some of the logic behind that in the novel is also the same logic that would be giving rise to death cults. It's the same sort of breakdown, the same sort of hopeless grasping for something familiar, believe it or not. Something sensible, if you rather. So there isn't really a chapter on zombie cannibals. They're kind of the story of the Brotherhood, as they are called, is scattered over several chapters. In the novel, there's 100, if you call them chapters, if you like. There's 100 chapters each for 100 days. So I'm going to read from my document here. We actually run into the Brotherhood on day 74, meaning they are pretty far along from the end of civilization. They've had a hard time. Characters in this part of the story that have already been introduced further up in earlier days, so I'll simply mention them here. There is the writer of the journal, whose name is Cougar. That's a self-insert. It made it more fun for me to write it. There is a dog named Bear, who's not a bear, who is actually a dog. He's a big dog. There is a character named Onyx, whose original name was Virginia. She renamed herself Onyx. She's a black woman, and her lady friend named Phoenix, who no one knows her name. That's just the name she was given. Phoenix has suffered severe head trauma during the collapse, and she's mute. She cannot speak, and she almost cannot communicate in other ways, although it turns out she's a very important character in the book later. She has a lot going on. Phoenix has a lot going on. Other characters, there's the Brotherhood, and this is what this is about. We open on day 74. We open with a small group of people, I think it's 6, who are making their way north by darkness. So the main character, the narrator, the author of the journal, this is journalism, right? There's no dialogue. This is journalism. So on day 74, the journalist is up on his roof, kind of on lookout. Couldn't sleep, so what he does is he goes up on the roof and wraps himself in a blanket. He has a ladder. He gets up on the roof, and he just watches what's going on outside the community. And the community is a bunch of neighbors, 20 or so, 40 or so homes that have torn down the fences between the homes that define their backyards and used the fence boards to create a new fence at the front of the houses. So now all the houses are behind a big fence that goes all the way around, and there are no fences between the houses. And so the land that used to be behind each house, all that land is now combined and held in commons. So that's the village. And the people live inside the walls, basically in their homes, but inside the walls, they don't go out. They stay inside, and they're trying to create a village commons with food and places for the children and a secure environment where they don't have to go out and people can't come in. So we are on day 74. and the narrator is up on the roof and sees some people going by in the dark. And so that's where we enter the story. The story of the Brotherhood is scattered across several chapters, so I'm going to have to pause at different points. Not pause the video, just I won't be narrating. And I'll have to find where the next piece is picked up, and hopefully I won't miss anything important. There's a lot of narrative about village life, how newcomers are handled, how the village approaches dangerous groups of people, and it's all relevant. So I'm not going to cut that out. I'm just going to go through and read the parts. Again, this is from my novel. This is a reading from my novel. It's not a particular chapter. Again, it's a topic that's actually worked into several chapters. So I encourage you to pick up the book and read it for yourself. I'm probably going to come out with a second edition. I've already been thinking about that. Some things that I would have liked to have had in here, but didn't think about it at the time. And we'll see. We'll see if I actually do that. So we are on day 74, and this is our entry. A late night note. I had some sleep, then woke up around midnight. I've been doing that a lot of late. In a fit of restlessness, I ended up on the roof, wrapped in a blanket. While up there, I saw a group of people making their way slowly by moonlight, silent as ghosts. I called to them from my perch on the roof, and it took a couple of tries before they located my position by voice. I suppose the blanket made me look like a blob, or they didn't know what to make of me being on a roof, because they quickly continued on their way without responding to my greeting. It was just as well. I couldn't offer them sanctuary. First, because it was too late at night to process a bunch of new arrivals, and second, because that's not my privilege. As they passed by, I said they could wait until morning, and maybe we could find some room for them then. But as I just mentioned, they didn't stop. I get it. Trusting strangers is a hard sell. Besides, once more we are running out of food. As I watched them go, I started thinking about what comes next for our group. We've been scavenging for building materials, but the next priority will be food supplies. We were getting occasional food surplus from some kind of county-operated support effort, but I heard recently that we've not been able to raise them on the satellite phone. They might have closed shop. We weren't specifically preparing for that day, but the day had to come. There was nothing we could have done about it in any event, so be it. The world is closing in. What a crawling, unrelenting disaster this has become. Slowly, in fits and starts, we are reverting to hunter-gatherers, with less actual hunting since there are so few animals here. Other than humans, obviously. As I wrote that last sentence, a chill went down my back. Could those people have moved on because they thought we might invite them in only to eat them? Has civilization fallen so badly as to revert to cannibalism? If so, then it's not civilization anymore, is it? We've somehow survived, but survival has changed us too. This makes me wonder what we have become. It's a question, but in what mirror can we see ourselves? Well, we are practicing kindness still, and cooperation. We seem human enough. There are certainly great challenges to come, and with more shocks, I wonder what new behaviors will emerge as we refuse to die. It's been said, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I still say people need more than brute strength going for them. Every time a bunch of people do die, the survivors will need to cling all the harder to what civilizes them. Though it must be harder as we are fewer. You cannot have a civilization of 1, nor even 100. That last heat wave must have killed a quarter of the human population around here, perhaps half. We have some solar power, and so far, it has helped. Early on, we had the good sense to organize around helping each other, and it still works. We have good leadership and planning, and a critical mass of people. Does all that together make us unique? Are we the last of civilized humans here? Are we the last anywhere? It's difficult to reconcile this thought, but our village may be among the last fragments of organized human enterprise for miles in all directions. This is the first time I've ever thought about extinction. I can't do it. Maybe we are rare in having figured out a ready way to organize people, but we cannot be the only ones. There will be other communities. We need to find them, and then we need to stay in touch. Start a mail system, a kind of modern Pony Express. Create trade routes, improve cultural ties, and share practices. My thoughts are racing, and I have a headache. I hope I can get some sleep. I hope those people come back. Day 75. Trust issues. Ha! They came back. I had the good sense to tell the leadership early on about a group I saw at night from the roof. So when the morning sentry cried out that there were refugees at the gate, everyone leaped into action. There was an interview and a health inspection, and they were shown into quarantine. There are 6 of them. They took the same house as the Wrights had been in. The Wrights, in turn, have already been distributed around wherever there are beds. I think the Wright children ended up staying with another family, but these days, that's surprisingly common. It's easier on the parents to manage all the children under fewer roofs, and the same homes become schools during the day. This new group does not have a name. I'm thinking of them as the Donner Party. That's probably cruel of me, but they have a hunted look about them that tells me they have seen terrible things. Viewed by daylight, I have some misgivings. To my thinking, the quarantine is as much about assaying their mental health as making sure they don't introduce the plague. The end of modernity has left people broken. It's been a bit over 2 months, yet enough has happened in that short time to twist us until we aren't recognizable to each other. Next note is at the end of the day. At the end of the day, I just came back from checking on the Donner Party. Apparently there was a problem toward evening. Someone in the gang seems to have lost it, or there was a disagreement. Whatever, there was an argument, and someone was stabbed. Not one of us, one of them. By the time our people took notice, it was done, and someone was dead. The rest of the party clammed up about it. Couldn't get anything out of them. They wouldn't allow anyone in to remove the body either. What a bunch of loonies. Donner Party is about right. Day 75, Predators. I think I did Day 75 twice. Maybe not in the final copy. We keep running out of construction lumber, and at about noon today, we dropped tools. That's expected. We're using a lot of lumber to build these underground dwellings. To get more, we'll need to forage further out from the compound. It's dangerous work. Dog packs, in particular, are a constant threat. And every time I think about our teams going long distances for materials, I have misgivings. The recent business with our Donner Party has my hackles up. These people are seriously messed up. They fight all the time and then refuse to tell us what the problems are. They look malnourished and thin, not surprising for the times, but their minds seem messed up. I spoke with the nurse. She's really busy, so I try to leave her alone, and she thinks they all have some kind of deep PTSD. Heck, don't we all? I guess they have it bad. Anyway, looking at them, I wonder what all is going on out there to break people. It's bad, whatever it is. Before the crew goes scavenging for lumber, I'm looking to have a look around. I'm taking Bear and 2 of the scouts to use as runners, should things go sideways. They also know where the other survivor communities are. We can start there and see what they've noticed. It will shoot the day, maybe 2, but I need to quell this feeling I have that the area has become a lot more dangerous than we've noticed from behind our walls. It's after dark, but we're back. We dropped by 2 other compounds not far away. It helped that the scouts had visited both recently. It also helped that we were recognized by sight because our neighbors have sealed themselves off. In both cases, they met us at their gates, weapons at the ready. While they were friendly enough, they were uneasy and didn't invite us in. One village, about half as many people as we have, was willing to talk. From what they told us, it's gotten ugly. One guy I spoke with described it like a zombie invasion. Not too long ago, I would have questioned that, except we have the Donner Party as a reference, so I also understood. The trouble arises in the south of town. Something bad must have happened down there that hasn't quite made its way as far as our village. The gentleman I spoke with described it as groups of rough-looking men, lightly armed with metal pipes and hand tools used as weapons. They don't make demands. They don't communicate at all. They just attack the walls trying to get in. His people are forced to post watch all night, and they have been under assault for 2 weeks, nearly every night. The walls have held, but every day they have to send out carpenters to repair them. It's dangerous and scary work. The nightly damage isn't extensive. Maybe the attackers are too weak or sick to accomplish much, but they keep trying to get in. Without an effort every day to repair the damage, they eventually might. I volunteered to stay and help out with the defenses, but he refused the offer. Of course, I was mostly thinking of conducting surveillance. This sounds like the kind of threat our group needs to get ahead of, should it come our way. Maybe they are attacking out of a camp. It sounds that way. I might need to find that camp and assess their potential for becoming troublesome. I wonder if our Donner Party, still cooling off in lockdown, is in any way associated with this bunch. Being about half feline myself, I have long whiskers, and my sudden misgivings about these new arrivals led me into some spying. The Donner Party still hasn't come around. We know nothing about them and don't know what to do with them. So I got curious, and I sat listening from my side of the fence. They didn't have much to say among themselves until around midnight, when it seemed like they woke up. I know now we have a serious problem. I overheard a man and woman softly talking about having made a mistake, leaving the Brotherhood. I can guess what the Brotherhood is. She then added that if they can gain the trust of the villagers, then they should be able to enter the compound, and then send a runner back to bring the tribe, and when they come, throw open the gates from inside. After that, there would be plenty of sacred offerings for everyone, and maybe the Brotherhood would not punish them and take them back. The man agreed this was a good plan, and that if he didn't eat soon, they would be forced to eat the dead guy, and then everyone in the village would know. My head nearly exploded. These people are cannibals. By naming them the Donner Party, I was closer to the truth than I might have guessed. It's near midnight, but as I'm writing all this down, I realize I can't sit on this. I'm going to get the leadership involved. We need to deal with these people, and fast. It's later. After a short meeting, we decided to take no action for now. Instead, we've posted an armed guard on the house, and we'll take care of these people in the morning. I'm going to bed, but I doubt I'll sleep. Day 76, an investigation. This morning, we have decided to send this Donner Party on their way. With luck, they will continue with their previous journey. To where, we do not know. Just to verify that this happens, I intend to follow them at a distance. I am taking the rifle. Where this Brotherhood is concerned, I am leaving nothing to chance. I will probably be out until late. Day 77, the Brotherhood. Yesterday it was a long and troubling day. It will take me the rest of my life to unsee what I have seen. I followed the Donner Party from a distance, as yesterday I wrote I would. It was easy to do. They are the most distracted bunch of losers I've ever been around. They resumed their northern direction, though not without some trouble, as they fought and bickered with every step. After about an hour of this, they stopped and had a fight between their numbers, screaming and shoving, knives flashing in the sunlight. This must be how they resolved matters, because after about 10 minutes of bloodless conflict, they settled down and worked through some issue. I couldn't hear much, but I guessed the topic was what they should do about the village they had just left behind. I suppose they still intended to hand us over to the Brotherhood, whatever that turns out to be. They singled out a teenage boy. This involved more shoving and cursing, that he should go back. He argued against this, which earned him a beating, after which he did as he was told and headed south. I was torn for a moment whether I should follow the party away to the north, making sure they didn't double back, or to follow the boy, as the rest of the group seemed inclined to just wait, further reinforcing my fear that they planned to make another try at us. I decided to go with the runner. I thought I would need to be careful, but the boy was as noisy as a hand cart and not once looked back to see if he was being followed. Definitely not a scout. I kept to my cover anyway, but never let him out of my sight. I maintained this cat and mouse game for most of the day. When I noticed he was becoming more cautious, as he did, so did I. Unexpectedly, he was assailed by some men I hadn't seen. They sprang out of the shadows and gave him a rough handling. He shouted names, indicating that he knew them. After some loud exchanges and kicking and flashing of knives, I guess everyone in the Brotherhood is like this. They paused to listen to his story, after which he was frog-marched away. Against all better judgment, I had found the Brotherhood. I followed the advance team and their captive to a rough circle of tents and shacks and found there an open encampment, meaning no walls, and the Brotherhood, about 20 strong within. As there were no walls, I could observe freely from any angle or distance, and this I did. They had no real weapons that I could see. The camp consisted of a few piled together huts made of shopping carts roped together, scrap lumber, and tarps. To one side was a single wooden cage made of lashed together pallets. In the cage were people. The people looked terrified. There were bones strewn widely within and without the camp, as if they had been flung away after a meal. I am a biologist. At one time I taught comparative anatomy to nursing candidates in college. As such, I know human bones when I see them. At times like this, it's hard not to jump to conclusions, so jump I did. There are no rules here. I don't need to be fair about it. I decided on the spot that the Brotherhood were a bunch of murderous cannibals, and the people in the cages were their captive prey, kept alive for the sake of preserving the meat. It occurred to me that the ones in the cages might have once been part of the crew, but fell out somehow. Our Donner Party might have themselves fled this fate, though their idea of returning to the tribe struck me as really strange. That's cult behavior, not good. Regardless, nobody I could see looked well, in or out of the cage. Taken together, they were about as hollow-eyed, scabrous, and emaciated a lump of humanity you could imagine this side of an actual zombie apocalypse. The youth was dragged before a sagging tar paper shack, out of which emerged a very thin, visibly unsteady man of middle age. He hit the boy, knocking him to his knees, and loudly proceeded with an interrogation. How dare you, and where have you been, and where are the traitors, and I ought to, were most of what he had to say. I reasoned that this man would be the leader of the band, and from the way he tottered and weaved around, I couldn't tell if he was drunk or weak from hunger. It might have been both, come to think of it. It wasn't much of an actual brotherhood, but they had a good sense of violence, I could tell. Violence doesn't bother me much, not as such. There I was, with the rifle. It was an easy shot. But the way of the scout, the way of the cat, is to wait and learn. After a short session of questioning, the boy was murdered on the spot. The death came out of nowhere. The edge of a knife across his throat, even as he begged for mercy. His body they dragged into the sagging shack, no doubt to become the entree for the evening feast. I had no feelings for the lad. He was a potential problem as much as the rest. But that single act of cruel indifference made me told me all I needed to know. I've given my first impressions. My second thought was that these people were utterly insane. My third thoughts, as I write this, are more reflective. I have to admit, maybe these people had solved the puzzle of how to find food after the collapse of the modern food supply. If on day 8 things had gone differently, the Brotherhood might have included myself. Anyway, and an hour later, the cannibals assembled a hunting party. They departed, heading north, maybe to catch up with the Donner Party and make short work of them, as they had with that boy. Fine by me. But I had to allow they would make a try at taking my village. The narrative, from what I could gather from a distance, seemed to be that the Donner Party had found some local idiots who were unaware of the danger. They would locate these unsuspecting patsies, send a woman or two to knock on the gate, and act all friendly-like, request sanctuary, and certainly get inside by any means. Come nightfall, open the gate from the inside, letting in the assault crew with much jubilation. I think the dead boy must have shared with the boss the clearly mistaken impression that the Donner Party had already been inside, but had then gotten themselves tossed out. The plan seemed to be that, with a bit of conniving, idiots like us could be betrayed by our kindness. If that was their plan, then it wasn't a bad one. Crude and evil, but sometimes crude is all evil needs to be. And this bunch, whatever else one could and should say about them, they were getting by, if just. Anyway, the Brotherhood foraging party was not large, so I could deal with them later. The leader had gone with the crew, no doubt on the principle that if you want it done right, do it yourself. I was happy to see that, and it opened up an opportunity to mess around. As I mentioned earlier, the Brotherhood encampment had no perimeter protection. It was an open camp. I didn't think the people left behind were in any position to oppose me, so I walked in. Didn't say hello, didn't threaten anyone. Went straight to the cage made of wood pallets and let the captives out. The rickety gate on the cage was held loosely by a loop of chain tied in a square knot. There wasn't even a lock. I guess the inmates were too worried about being caught to try to escape. Does that mean being killed trying to escape would be worse than being kept alive to be eaten anyway? Which is messed up, if you ask me. Either way, I didn't see where it was any of my business. Just the same, I loosened the chain and pulled open the gate. I told the captives they were free to go, and to look me up if they were ever in town, and good luck. Then I walked out. As my grandmother would have said, I had other rats to kill. After that, I went straight home by the shortest route. I greeted my wife, stowed the rifle, and now I'm making this entry. Not sure what to do next. Actually, I'm thinking I might take Bear and go for a walk. Let's call it a walk, before settling in for the evening and dinner. Later entry. In a change of plans, I had dinner first. That's not critical as such, but afforded me a chance to think all this through. I want to record my thoughts before I go for a walk, because I need to get this part right. Dinner was a simple affair: savory rice and beans, fresh early tomato salsa, and handmade corn tortillas. But I was glad to have it. While enjoying a proper meal, I started to feel bad on behalf of the cannibal zombies. Starting home from the Brotherhood camp, I was absolutely furious. And yet, before I was even halfway back, it hit me that the Brotherhood is what happens when 300 years of civilization evaporates in a month. Whose fault is that, anyway? I'd like to know. And what can we expect of people who experienced little supervision, even less personal agency, and who never gave a single critical thought to what was happening to them? And then here I insert a chapter called The Story of Belief. Religion is an abstraction, a jumbled collection of disconnected thoughts and feelings. There are as many religions as there are communities of people. Everyone has faith in one form or another. Even the common conclusion that there must be an inevitable technological progress or constant economic growth or beliefs, with no more support, in fact, than what one can glean from recent history. And then only if you view that history through a rose-colored lens. Progress for whom? Not everyone, clearly. And at what cost? But the real problem with abstraction, the problem with faith, is that it won't feed you. It is not seed or soil. It doesn't harvest the crops. Abstractions won't carry water for you or hold back the storm. Focusing your entire life on abstraction is fine while there are no interruptions in the smooth running of the modern technological world. But as soon as real physical challenges do arrive, abstraction is the first thing to fail. Imaginary things have no substance, and as such must be propped up by an abundance of real things like food, shelter, and peaceful coexistence. When these real things fall apart, then religion, politics, and economics evaporate back into the background noise of human beliefs from which these emerged. If anyone had cause to doubt this before, then their doubts have recently been addressed. We have no governance and no economic system. These collapsed in just days. Money is, for the moment, worthless. And as for religion, I have some things to say about that shortly. Our abstractions fascinated us while they still could. If you wanted to, you could make a case that the last 100 years of progress occupied itself mostly with creating more and more fertile means to explore and spread beliefs. It's no wonder to me that arguments and flame wars about politics, economics, and religion took over most of the internet. The digital world was the ultimate abstraction. Like belief, it became another place people could go to escape the real world. The internet then birthed every kind of perverse and corrosive conspiracy and, ultimately, became an open sewer filled with the worst varieties of human bile and hatred, with not one word or thought of it attached to reality. The internet devoured the minds of a generation. On day one of the collapse, nobody noticed that many people had lost their minds, had lost them years prior. If you spent any time on social media, you might have sensed the soul-corrupting madness bubbling just under the surface. Often enough, not even under, but right at the surface, out in the open, and daring anyone to notice or comment. Belief had found its natural habitat, and from there had, like some invasive weed, grown to take over the human world. The sudden collapse of the internet brought an interruption in all forms of social media. Up to the collapse, citizens lived in a bubble of mutually reinforcing self-importance. Actually, I have a thumbnail. There we go. Up to the collapse, netizens lived in a bubble of mutually reinforcing self-importance, in constant communication with people who validated their worldview unquestionably. When suddenly they couldn't get their fix every waking hour of every day, it would have come as a shock. I can imagine the paranoia, the sense that secret forces were at work against them and their online community. The world of unquestioned faith collapsed in tandem with the collapse of the larger human world, as I have described it in this narrative. They would have become bewildered, terrified, and alone. Not a good mix for maintaining one's mental hygiene while your world is imploding. We would like to think that a strong grounding in religious principles and brotherly toleration would have provided a buffer against the shock. But, like all other abstractions, piety was dragged down in the riptide of a tsunami wave that was the collapse of civilization. Piety was always special, backed by the presumed promise of a heavenly reward. After day one, all reward was off the table. Hell had come to town. For people with little or no grasp of reality, this would have seemed like a challenge to faith, like the end times foretold in Scripture, except without the validation of redemption. More importantly, it had been foretold on the internet. Taken that way, the zombie cannibals have been many years in the making, and now they are enabled, indeed encouraged, to act on their darker impulses. Free to act out all the violence they had previously practiced only in blog posts, chat rooms, and 30-second videos. From what I've seen, they are clearly not having a great time. I guess this is not turning out to be the glorious reign of retribution they were hoping would ride into town on the pure white horse of racial and cultural purity, purging all before it with a river of heretic blood. When the wheels finally came off, they were probably staying up nights in orgiastic prayer, social media doom scrolling, and swearing loyalty to blood and soil. All of that rather than, let's say, rediscovering the actual soil under their feet and planting seeds for the future. Not metaphorical seeds either, but real seeds to become food. Too much faith and vitriol got in the way of saving themselves. Eventually, they ran out of booze and drugs, ran out of bullets, ran out of people to hate, and then ran out of options. Inevitably, with righteousness alone providing such thin gruel, they ran out of food. Without a backup plan, and having only the memory of vast conspiracies and bitterness to carry them through, they took the next logical step and consumed what was in front of them, meaning each other. I suppose it even made some kind of sense. Eat of my flesh, drink of my blood, or something. It's not my book. Yeah, I'm likely overthinking things again. They probably really are a bunch of evil chat room trolls and unworthy of my compassion. But this is the work we all need to do as the fall of civilization snatches away the comforting mask that's been hiding our fears from us. Too many of us stayed on the consumerist treadmill, even as we should have been thinking clearly about what to do after the fossil fuels were withdrawn, as had to happen. Most of us never knew what it meant to create anything. When it all fell apart, we were left with the impulse to consume. And when that day came, fear. Blind, conspiratorial, reactive, unhinged fear. From fear came anger. From anger came violence. It turned out we were only ever a few missed paychecks and 20 gallons of gasoline away from the zombie apocalypse. Okay. I know now what to do about the Brotherhood. Time for that walk. I'm too old for this business. Being reasonable all the time is work for a younger man. At my age, you just want to seriously clean shit up so you can go to bed at a reasonable hour. After dinner, I grabbed the leash and went to find Bear. He was keen to see me until he saw the leash. He hates the leash. It means minding his doggy manners and no running around being a monster, killing rats and other dogs. But he puts up with it because he's a good boy. I wasn't sure where the Brotherhood would be holed up. I figured nearby, implying a short search. I needn't have worried about that. Did I make clear earlier how noisy this bunch is? I think there's some kind of hangry all the time. Or maybe it's just a culture of chronic paranoid invective that, lacking social media as an outlet, they must now turn on each other to feed their addiction. Bear heard them first, and using him for range and direction, we zeroed in. And then there they were, bickering loudly as I walked into their hiding place. They clustered around a wind-up flashlight that they were taking turns cranking on because the battery was useless. What a bunch of sorry sods. Good thing for me and everyone else that the Brotherhood never got their act wired up tight. All I wanted to do was talk, so I said what I came to say. The shorter version of the meeting was this. I asked them to stay away, not even to squint at our village, and if there was ever any trouble, I'd let the dog loose to have his way with them. Now, put that way, it sounds terrible on my part, and that's a fair accusation. I believe I was slightly more diplomatic than that. I do recognize that this is a free country. As far as I know, it still is. If a bunch of zombie cannibals want to shuffle around the neighborhood, eyeing everyone they see as the main course, and that's all they can get up to, well then, that's their right. Everyone needs a hobby. I would offer the same consideration to a pack of hungry wolves or hyenas, and not resent them for their perspective much, if at all. I am a biologist. Survival of the fittest is more than just a bunch of words to me. Nor I was abrupt as all that. I was nice about it. The longer version of it is this. I walked into their middle, said hello, and revealed that I was from the compound just over the way. I said I knew who and what they were, where they were camped, and what they were up to. I said I did not approve of cannibalism in general, and as applied to humans, not at all, but to each their own. As such, they had nothing to worry about from me presently, but if they want to hear some words to the wise, then to steer clear of our village, and if there was ever any trouble, I'd let the dog loose to have his way with them. To which Bear gave a friendly woof, as if to suggest he both understood and was ready to rumble any time they were up for it. He's that good a boy, is our Bear. I asked if they had any questions, getting no reply. At which point I was done with them, bid them good hunting by way of parting, and went home. While I might not like them and wouldn't want to be them, my scant exposure to social media did teach me not to feed the online trolls, or, given what they have now become, the cannibal horde. I hope that's the last I see of the Brotherhood. I'll be honest, once confronted with the raw fact of their sorry state, I realize they probably don't have much more than a month to live in any case. Maybe their diet is that harmful. I don't see why it would be, but I'm not a nutritionist. More likely, they are so deranged they cannot survive even as cannibals, in which survival ought to be the easy part given the abundant food supply. Given how few people I see on the streets these days, the cannibal food supply might be collapsing along with everything else. If so, that's some interesting data by itself. Have so many people left the area or just died that now even the cannibals are starving? Their captives, the folks I released from their cage, might have been some of their own, singled out for their real or imagined crimes against the Brotherhood. I suspect that's what happened with the Donner Party and why they had to hit the trail, and also why they were trying to find a way back into good graces. Think about that for a moment. Who is so desperate that they want to rejoin a zombie army? What is that about? It's about community, probably, or maybe family. It's a perversion of family, of course. But this far into the collapse of civilization, who am I to judge? That's what I've come up with anyway. I need to see it for what it is, a way to cope. I don't understand it. I can't imagine myself doing it. But so what? It's what they've come up with. It looks to me like a dead end, emphasis on dead. But maybe everything we are about now is all just one integrated, inevitable dead end, including our little village with its walls and garden beds and the solar panels and overhead wiring and all the rest. Our silly little portable cell tower with a range of possibly a mile, reaching nobody. All these struggles to pull something together from the tattered and frayed remnants of what, at one time, felt to us like the pinnacle of human achievement. All of it, every last honest word and good deed, just another dead end. An end where everyone you meet, every bump at night, could be a starving cannibal in just as bad a fix as you are. So sure, raise a glass. Let's all cry a cheer and Godspeed to the cannibals, the last of the internet zombies. May they find the great shitpost in the sky, where everyone they love agrees with them, and the libtards are really just so stupid that they are only useful as pig feed, or, to put it another way, as long pork. This is definitely a young man's game. Now my brain hurts, but at least it functions properly. And so, finally, to bed. Now I need to find the next installation. It's a little ways down. So this is actually day 80. So this is 4 days later or so. Yeah, 4 days later. It's called, day 80 is called Death and Rebirth, but that's not what this is about. The narrator has been doing construction work in the last 4 days. Another door is done today. I'm making good progress. 2 more to go. But the day ended on a concerning note. Odd that I was just a paragraph ago wondering how the many new arrivals were being managed, because now, somehow, the cannibal Brotherhood is inside the walls. I knew something was up when a pair of young people came looking for me. They were as hollow-eyed, scabrous, and emaciated a pair as you would ever have the misfortune to meet. Their faces, as they stared at me, looked haunted, as if they had seen horrible things. I don't know what it was that set me off, but as they gained my attention and I looked up, I nearly jumped out of my skin. These certainly were representative cannibals from the Brotherhood. This had been their plan, to get someone inside the walls. My reaction was to go into attack mode. I didn't act on it, but the impulse took me anyway, so that every nerve in my body buzzed with a hot panic. There was no call for that. They were just teenagers. But had they been adults, I might have taken them out on the spot. Fortunately, they weren't sneaking around or coming at me with a shiv. They were standing there looking like beaten dogs. What had hit me was the pure aggressive adrenaline, the first indication of how keyed up I had become regarding the Brotherhood. Few in our village had even heard about our close call, as it was agreed to keep a lid on that menace. But since we did do that, keep it under wraps, nobody else really understood the threat. So here I was, facing the fact that we could be breached, overrun, and some of our own spirited away to the cook fire. I think the two saw the transformation come over me because they backed off a step, fear in their faces. I was part way through doing something unpleasant when I was able to catch myself. Just describing that moment again, even hours later, still leaves my heart pounding. The pair were not unescorted, but had been accompanied by one of our adults, though not anyone I really knew. The man told them to tell me their story, but not before sharing how they had made their way in. Apparently there is now, should I call it secret, a gate at the far side of the compound. Some of the gardeners have started working on land just outside the fence, and to facilitate coming and going, they have created a convenient opening in the fence by removing some screws and letting the fence boards aside. Let me say right here, my head nearly exploded on hearing this. If the Brotherhood had found that opening earlier, they could have let themselves in and not had to deal with me at all. What a disaster! In which event, I would have had to kill them outright, and certainly I would have done it. And I would not have cared who was watching me work or how they felt about that. But purposeful and directed mayhem was not how I wanted to deal with the zombie cannibals. Look, I could have killed them all back at their compound if that was my inclination. Having done so, not disturbed or endangered my village in the least, and I would have been providing a wider community service in the bargain. I'm trying to be more nuanced about these things, okay? Give me some credit. Anyway, the story is, these youths found the gardeners working outside the wall, said they knew me, what the actual fuck, and asked if they could come inside to have a word with me. They were escorted in, through a hole in our fence defensive perimeter, I say again, and brought to see me at work on my current project. My heart pounding, I asked them to explain themselves, and quickly. One of them told me his name was Andrew, but I could call him Andy. And the other was his twin sister, Andrea, who, get this, also went by Andy. Andy and Andy, the zombie twins from Cannibal Corners. I'll admit it, it was charming, enough to ground me a little so he could finish. Though I did not recognize them, they recognized me and also knew where to find me. Andy and Andy were the inmates in the cage, whom I had liberated and told them to do as they pleased, including, they reminded me, and notice, without a shred of irony, to look me up the next time they were in town. I didn't actually intend for them to do that. I was being a sarcastic asshole. I'll admit it. I'm offhandedly mean and have a cutting sense of dark humor. It all comes with the fangs and claws. Honestly, I have no control at times. Once they were out of the cage, and having already overheard what the Brotherhood was planning, they decided to take some initiative and try to warn us of the coming attack. But then they got lost and had to take even more time to find something to eat and drink, and so showed up after the actual drama had been diffused. Andy, or maybe it was Andy, offered that they never ate the people, were wholly innocent, and that the reason they were in the cage at all was because Andrew kept sneaking off to forage for other food. Pastor Gibraltar said that all processed foods were poison to the spirit and that the Brotherhood had to eat from out of the hand of God. For some reason, eating from the bounty of God meant eating humans. Maybe it has something to do with the original sin, or Abraham and Isaac, or the Eucharist. Don't ask me. I'm just a dumb animal. I asked the other Andy if she thought Pastor Gibraltar made any sense. She frowned and said he was the dumbest person she had ever met, and that his followers were insane. Check and check. I asked them what their plan was, and Andrew, said they needed to get away from the Brotherhood, rebuild their strength, and after the baby was born, to find a village that would take them in. And there the conversation ended. I marched the two of them to Nurse Macklemore. She was busy counseling a teenage girl, the girl's mother standing nearby. Women's issues, I assumed, so not the worst time to barge in with a half-starved, pregnant waif in tow. After pardoning myself for the interruption, I explained the urgency of the moment. Macklemore had heard about the Brotherhood. I was surprised, but it made it easier to explain the importance of this girl and her likely pregnancy. That got things moving. I was firmly ejected from the clinic, but I noticed how the visiting mother and her daughter were not. There is no better way to learn about womanly matters than to have a ready example at hand, yes? Andrea would get an exam, and that other girl would receive an important life lesson. I ended up outside with Andrew. As we had nothing else to do for a bit, I had him tell me the story of how he and his sister ended up hanging around with the Brotherhood. And so here's a chapter called The Story of Andy and Andy. Theirs had been a family of 6, living in the San Fernando Valley in the city of Northridge. At the time, their parents were still together. Father worked as an optical engineer for a company that sold industrial lasers, and the mother had always been home. Andrew and Andrea, at 14, were the eldest of the children. They had 2 younger brothers. Benjamin was 12, and Paul was 10. Religion had always been an essential part of family life. Church every Sunday, Bible study on Wednesdays, and the children attended private Christian schools. They were political and social conservatives, as Andrew had understood it. Their life was the church, and so were their values. Andrew was not as into it as Andrea had been. He felt there was always far too much paranoia in the church community to be healthy. The churchgoers he knew were obsessed with fears of wokeness, gayness, progressive hedonism, and liberal overreach. Taxes were horrible, social programs were the work of satanic forces, and the federal government was overrun with atheistic lizard people sacrificing children at the altar of Moloch. Climate change was a hoax, and if it wasn't a hoax, it was the fault of the Chinese, or it was caused by sunspots. Science was suspect, if not actually evil. Evolution theory was a religion, and Christians across the globe were subject to the worst excesses of materialist persecution, including not being able to post the 10 Commandments in public schools. Oh, the horror. Andrew had been thinking for a while there were real problems in the world needing real attention. Andrea reminded him that faith in Jesus was the solution to all earthly ills. It came as no surprise then that when the bottom had fallen out of civilization, his family had been completely unprepared. Religious life tends to make one think less about outward influences and more about important social cohesion. The idea was that God would provide, and the community, united in faith, would guide them all through whatever it was that Satan had in store. It hadn't worked out. As the situation in Northridge had deteriorated, everyone in their, quote, tightly knit spiritual community had scattered. God was apparently not paying attention right then, as the service stations were under siege, looting was rampant, and the roads out of the region were a car-choked standstill. Eventually, the family loaded themselves into the SUV, made a run for it, same as everyone else. All but the family dog, who had earlier run away from fright. They headed north on Interstate 5 and got about 100 miles before the press of traffic became too much. There were cars and trucks everywhere, some still moving, but many others simply abandoned. The stuck vehicles were backing everything up. There were people walking along the road, asking for a lift. It was hot, and the air stank of fuel vapors and exhaust. There was also a lot of violence, road rage incidents, gunshots, and fistfights. They finally left the freeway at an unmarked overpass, intending to cross over to Highway 101 using rural roads. The congestion there was just as bad. After 2 days en route, they had made little progress. They slept in the car the first night and ate from their small cache of snacks. Andrew wasn't clear on what happened after that. He hadn't slept the night before and was physically and emotionally exhausted. He was asleep when, the next morning, they were on a small winding road in the hills. Some other cars cut them off and forced the SUV into a ditch. Father got out of the car. There was an argument, and he was shot. Mother jumped out of the car screaming and was also shot. The men came and took everything they could find. Then they did something under the car. Andrew thought they must have taken the gas out of the tank. The 4 children, terrified and screaming for their parents, were dragged away into vans. Andrew and Andrea went into one van, and Benjamin and Paul went into another. They never again saw their younger brothers. The van was driven up the road to a small town, where they were forced into a truck trailer parked behind a service station. There were 5 others already there. He didn't know how long they were held captive in the truck, but the trailer got really hot twice, and he could remember, and they were given water and fed 3 times, so maybe 2 days total in captivity. Then there was a terrible fight outside. Shouting, gunshots, and vehicle collisions. At least 1 bullet whizzed through the sides of the trailer as the 7 captives cowered on the floor. The fighting went on for at least a half an hour before it ended. When the surroundings were quiet, Andrew and Andrea started pounding on the walls of the trailer, afraid that if they were going to be abandoned there to die. But shortly the trailer was opened and they were let out the back, blinking in the bright light of noon. That was how they met the Brotherhood. Pastor Gibraltar introduced himself and his crew and told the captives they were safe. The 5 other inmates were Mexicans, and they didn't speak English, or maybe they just pretended not to. After a short attempt to communicate, Gibraltar sent them on their way. They headed off on foot, seeming eager to get clear of the place. That left Andrew and Andrea. Because their rescuers seemed familiar, meaning Christian and white, neither of them questioned what to do when the pastor invited them to come to his Christian retreat in the hills. The Andes were exhausted, traumatized, and ready to accept any sanctuary. The retreat was nice. It was situated at the end of a gravel road. There was a small church, painted white, a half-dozen cabins under a stately oak tree, a playground, and a short yellow-orange school bus. The pastor explained that his main church had been in the city of Fresno, where the congregation ministered to the migrant farm labor community. The retreat was used for summer camp and spiritual workshops, but everything had gone sideways. When the civilizational collapses started to show signs of ramping up, it was decided that some of the congregation would hold out at the retreat until the situation resolved itself, or until the rapture, which was judged just as likely. The Andes were with the Brotherhood for 2 weeks at the retreat, during which time the collective situation went steadily downhill. Pastor Gibraltar became increasingly paranoid and quarrelsome. There were daily arguments and even fights as the congregation argued about what to do. They were becoming increasingly isolated. Food was running out, and the electricity had failed. Without electricity, the well didn't work, and they shortly ran out of water. There were some men who would leave in the morning foraging and come back with whatever supplies they could find. Canned goods, snacks, bottled water, occasionally a gallon jug of gasoline. Andrew went out with them once, and it was terrifying. They were just looters, similar to the ones who had killed his parents. He worked with the scavenging effort because he had to, but he hated it. One night, 2 women from the congregation came and took Andrea away. They didn't say why. They didn't bring her back. And when he found her in the morning in one of the cabins curled up on a mattress, she told him the men had been raping her. They plotted an escape, but shortly agreed it was hopeless. Neither could drive. Andrew might be able to escape on his own during a looting run into one of the small towns, but that left Andrea. Clearly, they were not going to let the two of them go anywhere together, as Andrea was being used as insurance against Andrew making a break for it. A little later, the Brotherhood decided to abandon the retreat. Some of the men had been working on resolving some problem with the school bus, and it was finally running. The congregation loaded into it, bringing what supplies they had, and headed out. Andrew wouldn't talk about that journey. All he said was it had been seriously messed up. They headed north, looting and killing as they went. Pastor Gibraltar was becoming increasingly unhinged, shouting all the time about sinners and the coming rapture, and the others were just as bad as he was. Some days out, and without having eaten for 2 days, they found a young man sleeping in the back of a car. They killed him, quartered him, and cooked him on the spot. The pastor was reading quotes from the Bible the entire time, and everyone else was echoing praises to the Lord. The brother had become pious cannibals, punishing the faithless, eager to be assumed into heaven. It sounded in many ways like their prior church. It was sickening, and worse than even that, it was completely insane. That day, Andrew and Andrea tried to escape, but they got caught. Their hands were bound, and they were tied into the seat at the back of the bus. After this, the men would every night take turns at Andrea. She had never been on birth control, as that was anti-scripture, and thought to promote sexual promiscuity. After the fall of civilization, none of that mattered, but biology never took a rest. The two talked about suicide, but they didn't have the means and were too frightened that all they might do is mess it up. They were being watched all the time. The Brotherhood wanted Andrea for the forced sex, and Andrew most likely to control Andrea, perhaps to eventually eat him, by all appearances. And all day and most of the night, praising the Lord and praying for the coming of Christ to strike down the apostates and the unbelievers. The congregation lived like this for several weeks, driving by day while they had gasoline and scrounging as they went, stealing gas, breaking into homes to find water, not even pretending to search for normal food, and every day killing someone to eat them. Andrew would go foraging with the others and would secretly keep some food when he found it, to share that later with Andrea when they were alone. They both knew they were surely starving to death. The others weren't looking all that good either. During that time, the congregation got as far as the Bay Area before the bus finally ran out of gas for good. Every place they stopped had already been completely vandalized. For every gallon of fuel, the Brotherhood was stuck. Didn't matter. There were always people around, so there was no lack of food. They wandered for a while, Andrew and Andrea in tow and under constant watch, until there was no further point. It was during this time that Andrea suspected she was pregnant. The thought tore her apart. She had no means to end her pregnancy, and wouldn't if she could. For the sake of the baby, she could not commit suicide or endanger herself. Where the Brotherhood ultimately landed was just where I had found them, encamped. They had been there for a month or so before I showed up. The Andes hadn't always been kept in the cage, but they were not allowed to roam either. One of them was always locked up. Andrew figured they would eventually be eaten, but there always seemed to be someone else less lucky to push the fateful day further off. When Andrew could, he would go on foraging runs. He brought back some useful things. The Brotherhood always seemed to be short of matches, but he also secreted any food he found. He and Andrea would plan to eat from the dead at the evening meal, along with the rest of the Brotherhood. But when they were alone in the cage, they would eat whatever Andrew had managed to sneak in unobserved. It was always too little to matter much. Andrea was worried about the health of the baby, and they didn't know how the Brotherhood would react if they ever found out she was pregnant. Andrew and Andrea had discussed her pregnancy, and that she wanted the baby. It didn't matter that she hadn't wanted the sexual assault. The baby was a separate concern from that. So they hid her condition under loose clothing, and Andrew worked all that much harder to see that she had as much food as he could find. I had been listening carefully to all this. Andrew basically did a running brain dump, probably out of relief, but maybe also in part to set the stage for a plea. It turned out he needn't have worried on that last point. While Andrew was still telling me his story, Nurse Macklemore came out of the clinic with Andrea steadied on her arm, and the mother and daughter pair following behind, the latter blushing crimson. Well, that must have been a real eye-opener for her. Another girl her age, pregnant by forcible rape, likewise forced early into adult decisions and responsibilities. She and her mother would have much of importance to talk about. When Andrea saw her brother waiting outside, she smiled like a summer sun. Whatever you might say about her filthy clothing and emaciated appearance, she was genuinely pretty when she smiled, and likely a sweet girl. Andrew gathered her up into an embrace, and they shared some whispered words, the only thing I could catch from her being healthy. The nurse gave me a sour look, which I interpreted as an indication I was being a problem again. I shrugged, and she approached. With her hands on her hips, she demanded to know what I intended to do with the twins. Before I could even start with an answer, she declared that Andrea was barely able to sustain a pregnancy in her condition and needed a month of food and rest just to stabilize. Andrea had a healthy baby and would give birth in 35 weeks or so, but there was no possible way a young mother could deliver a baby on her own, nor with the help of just her brother, and so they both would need to stay in the village until the baby was born and mother and baby were shown to be stable enough for another situation, which might take years. She said it. She meant it. She was telling and not asking, and I couldn't get a word in edgewise. I looked at the Andes. Andrew was concerned, but Andrea was terrified. Did they really think I had that much authority? I mean, I had just been scolded by a furious woman a head shorter than I am. What was I supposed to do now? I promised Nurse Macklemore they would be taken care of, and that I would see to it myself. If there was any pushback, I'd say it was a declared medical emergency and to take up any complaints with the professional staff. The nurse smiled at me, said it was the right answer. Good cougar, pat on the head. She turned back to the twins. She asked Andrew to look after his sister and make sure she got plenty to eat and drink and was allowed to sleep. Then she asked Andrea to come back to the clinic every day for a follow-up and to, and this was directed back at myself, report on how well she and her baby were being received. End quote. Why is it that I get blamed for everything? I guess her main point was that this was important. 2 lives were at stake, and she didn't want these kids and a baby to slip through the cracks. Again. Well, guess what? Neither do I. They might have been living among cannibals, but that wasn't their fault. I repeated respectfully that I would see to it personally. I don't have time for another project. Getting these 2, well, that is, these 3, into housing we don't already have. But I can't argue it isn't critical. I certainly don't want another scolding from Macklemore. So that is the tale of the Andes. I guess we're stuck with them. One more thing. When the nurse had returned to her clinic, leaving me with the twins, Andrea asked me if our village was Christian. I replied that, while I wouldn't speak for the others, I was doing comfortably well these days just being an animal. And that if they spent much time here, they might discover that we're all on about the same level and quite comfortable with it. Andrea smiled and said she would like to try being an animal too. She asked if I could teach her and Andrew how to go about it. I did say that pregnant women were always honorary animals, and if she didn't quite follow my meaning at first, then she would understand better when it came time to give birth, and for probably a decade after that. I guess Andrew and Andrea are ready to set aside the distracting abstractions that nearly got them killed, and that, in a real way, killed the rest of their family, and killed their city, and killed their civilization, killed the church. This is a real problem, being too wrapped up in bullshit like culture wars and religiosity to save yourself. Animals never let things like that happen, not without a fight. And here in our village, surrounded by violence, criminality, and cannibalism, and global heating, we are all about the fight. Just a follow-up. Recall what I mentioned Recall where above I mentioned a mother and daughter being at the clinic when Andrea showed up? Right. So, they came to me later and asked if they could take Andrea in until the baby comes, or until she was strong enough to fend for herself. I mentioned the brother, but they are all females in their home and didn't really want him hanging around. That makes sense. We'll house Andrew in some other way. Maybe he can fit in with the scouts. I'll ask. He's a talented and dedicated forager, according to the story he shared of their survival, so that might even be the best outcome for him. I trust the scouts to keep a close eye on him. As long as he stays clean, he can check in with his sister anytime he wants, and otherwise rest easy knowing she is receiving the best medical attention our troubled times can offer, as well as having found a supportive and accepting situation for herself and her baby. Not bad at all for a couple of scared kids on the run. It's too bad how all those terrible things happened, but ultimately they are survivors. When it comes right down to it, surviving is all any of us are doing. Some are doing better than others, but this is a hard binary. Did you survive, or did you not? It's for that reason that I just can't seem to sustain any ill will towards the Brotherhood. They are as crazy as a sack of weasels, but they are survivors too. Let the future judge them if it still wants to. I'm looking forward to seeing the baby. And I think... Okay, there's a little more. Let me check if it's here. I think I'll read this part. Day 83. Requiem. Nurse Macklemore cornered me this morning, but only to tell me that she had been checking in on Andrea and was satisfied with her situation. That's good, because I hadn't been looking in on the girl at all. She is ensconced among friendly females, so I wasn't much worried. And now I'm not worried at all. I'll drop on in on her later just because I like to keep track of loose ends, and the Andes are still a loose end in my book of shadows. Yesterday, toward evening, I saw Andrew going out the main gate with a group of scouts. His color was improved, so he's been eating. They were all chatting amongst themselves and seemed in good spirits. They all look equally thin to me now, but that's probably just how young people look to older people. Andrew ought to work out fine. This got me thinking about Phoenix, who I hadn't seen in a while, so I went to find her and Onyx. They weren't in their room, but a nearby gardener pulling weeds told me how, of late, they rise early and go to work in a nearby community. Odd, that. We have a lot of work right here. I got directions and set out looking for them. I've been to this group several times already. They knew me and let me in. It wasn't difficult to find Onyx. She was giving some sort of speech, talking loudly, and her chocolate-covered voice is distinctive that way. Phoenix was seated just behind her, watching in a disinterested way. Being careful not to intrude, those two can do as they like, I watched at a distance, spying, yes, but only as an instinct I cannot completely turn off. I watch everything constantly. My one immediate concern was that this community might be going bad, and that Onyx had somehow noticed this and was giving them a pep talk, essentially repeating what she had done with Phoenix, but for a group. Another application of her mindful, healing attention. The woman is remarkable that way. There were about a dozen people standing or sitting around her as she spoke. When I saw this, I started thinking about the lesson of the Brotherhood, about how, when things do go sideways, they can veer hard into a ditch. An early intervention in their case, a persistent and grounding intelligence, might have made all the difference. On the other hand, a grounding influence towards authentic moral behavior might have doomed them to starvation, the likely fate of so many others. So, which is better? A large part of not becoming extinct is just not dying. If morals get in the way of survival and usher in extinction, are they really moral at all? Some will insist it is better to die starving than embrace cannibalism. The members of the historical Donner Party did engage in cannibalism by eating the dead. Because they did, they survived to tell their story and went on to live otherwise normal lives. Where does morality sit in all this? I was listening to Onyx and enjoying the lessons she was giving. She was doing a much better job of it than I would have. I am far too materialistic and savage for the business of soul salvation. She spoke of the saving grace of cooperation, of pulling together toward common survival. She spoke of how, in these dark days, all our fates are bound together in mutual uplift. And then she said the thing that shook me. We are bound in brotherhood. It was at that very moment, when, being a bit startled by Onyx's words, that I noticed Phoenix watching me intently. It was subtle, but she was looking straight at me, unblinking. I was partially obscured behind a building, not moving, and yet she pulled me out of the background with the unerring alacrity of a predator. For part of a minute, we looked at each other the way one cat casually observes another. Then she closed her eye and nodded ever so slightly in my direction. In recognition of an equal in a secret world only she and I could occupy. I did the same by way of reply. We watched each other a moment more, and then we turned our attention back to Onyx. So, Phoenix sees more than she lets on. That's good. I will remember this. Having seen enough and my native curiosity fully satisfied, I turned away, intent on returning to my other responsibilities. But then I had an insight. It was because of an overlay in my mind of the Brotherhood and the concept of brotherhood. Phoenix had, in a way I will never account for, given me the assignment to salvage the cannibals. I am not a brother to anyone. I am a solitary force in the world, moving like a mountain lion through this dense thicket of disasters and loss. I'll do what good I can when urgency turns my thoughts to the greater good, but otherwise I observe and remain aloof. I know this attitude isn't common, nor should it be. I am a force of one, and it works. Yet I find myself wound up in this ongoing bonfire of the vanities, in this passion play of the fall of humanity, annoying at times, and at other times compelling. I am like Mr. Spock in the old Star Trek shows. I find humans fascinating. As does Phoenix, apparently. So very fascinating, yes. So be it. Let's see if there is anything useful that can be done with these Donner cannibals. I believe this starts with a call to our local National Guard detachment. I made the call to the county using McLemore's private line. The guard will be at the cannibal camp at sunup tomorrow. I will be there as well. Nothing will happen until we have synced up, and the first thing that happens is we earn the trust of the Brotherhood. We will end this. We will chant a requiem for the ghosts of the age and consign them to their final rest in the same tomb as modernity, like living ghosts here at the end of the world. Day 84. The Black Temple. Well, that went better than I had any right to expect. It worked in part because the 9-county administrative region has established a FEMA-supported hospital in the East Bay outside of Oakland that includes an Army psychiatric ward. It's not nearby, but the National Guard has a bus they can use for shuttling people around. With all that established, all we needed to do was convince the Brotherhood to accept the services on offer and get into the bus. It should have been that simple, but nothing is simple, not anymore, and certainly not with this bunch of loons. To smooth things out, I entered the encampment alone and unarmed. That caused a stir, but, oddly enough, no violence. The Brotherhood may have been a bunch of deranged savages, but their savagery is aimed mostly at each other, or at food, which often enough is the same thing. I was in for some verbal abuse, but I expected that, so it didn't bother me. They are the ones with the problem, not me. I talked to them as an equal, in general, about how they needed help, that needing help is not a sign of weakness, and that help was available. I went on like that for at least 3 hours. Pastor Gibraltar sermonized for a good part of that until he finally talked himself into a state of exhaustion. After that, I got down to the serious work. The offer was this. They agreed to accept institutionalization at the regional facility with the intake diagnosis of advanced post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. Everyone would need to take treatment, no exceptions, and no one left behind. I explained there was no shame in this, and that God did not love them less for having succumbed to the ravages of the times. They would receive food and medical treatment with no restrictions on their spiritual pursuits, provided that they did not leave the hospital without first a clean psychological evaluation, and provided that they did not try to harm anyone, not even each other. It probably comes off simple enough stated like that, but there was round after round of argument. I have never in my life seen so much denial, paranoia, psychopathy, and pure social awkwardness as I had to deal with in the Brotherhood. Several times I wanted to take Gibraltar by the neck and throttle him. That's my fault, not his, and I was acutely aware of that at the time. Somehow I got through it. I didn't walk away, and I did not overtly threaten to kill anyone. Maybe the negotiations would have been best handled by an actual psychiatric professional, but most of those are gone now, and who remains will be buried in caseload. So, instead, the Brotherhood got a fully configured cougar. And I, being not in the mood for any monkey business, serves them right. And who can say? Perhaps an impatient apex predator was just the thing needed. Eventually, slowly, they came around. The guard brought some meals. They set up a makeshift buffet by popping open a bunch of MREs and leaving them out on a folding table. These were tempting, and I helped myself to one, with encouragement to the others to do the same. Pastor Gibraltar pitched a fuss, lamenting how the corrupting influence of unclean things had been the fall of mankind, and then throwing a tantrum about fluoride poisoning and rampant woke socialism amounting to treason. I recommended he shut up and eat something, hoping that when some food reached his brain, he would be able to think clearly. After the others accepted the offered meals, so did he. The man might be a shit leader, but at least he can follow. That, in a nutshell, was always the core problem with the American populist politics. Crap leaders, dedicated followers. No way that could go wrong, yeah? There is little enough to say about the rest of it. After a light meal and some additional coaching, the Brotherhood, one by one, got on the bus. Again, the pastor was the last holdout. Rather than be mean about it, I resorted to a reality check. I reminded him that his people were going to a strange land, seeking the help they very much needed, as did he, and that they would feel better about this if their spiritual leader was with them. They would need him still, and after it was all over and everything set right, maybe he could start another church. I didn't really think that. The man is clearly a menace, but I knew it would appeal to his toxic narcissistic personality disorder. And it did do that. He got on the bus. I helped him mount the steps and felt a shaking weakness rattle through his gaunt frame. When the bus door closed and the engine started, it was about the most satisfaction I have felt in a long time. And that was how we brought the Brotherhood back into civilization, or what passes for it these days. It was a nice hack, as we used to say, and was the end and justification of my thoughts and actions toward them. I'm not saying I was the only one who could have done this, but ultimately I was the one who actually did. And a big shout out to the troops. After dealing with the Brotherhood all morning, I took the rest of the day off, mostly to sleep. These early mornings take a toll. While I have nothing more to say about that, I will add here my later interactions with Onyx and Phoenix. Having some business with those two, I woke from my nap wanting to look them up. I found the pair outside their tiny room, resting in the shade. Onyx was friendly. She always is. And Phoenix was as uncommunicative as ever. Nice act she has going on there. I nodded to Onyx, but I spoke to Phoenix first. I told her I had organized a rescue mission for the Brotherhood, and that they were even then on their way by bus to a regional hospital having facilities to treat trauma, delusion, and PTSD. This news garnered no reaction of any kind from Phoenix, exactly as anticipated. Had I read too much into a blink and a nod? Had I made the whole thing up? Nope, this was just Phoenix, being her bad old inscrutable self. Onward. I told Onyx I had listened in on her lecture the day before. I should have called it her sermon, and having heard this, it had given me an idea. Perhaps what we were missing is something like a church or temple, a place where people could go to receive a dose of spiritual nourishment. Everyone alive is suffering from PTSD to a degree. Maybe not to push them over the edge into madness, though we shouldn't rule that out. And as such, everyone has a real need for emotional support. A temple could offer many things, but mostly it would offer a formal venue where people could tell their story. What the temple would need to function properly is a permanent location open to all, and a reliable person to sit and listen and provide counseling. And then, if warranted, to deal with the problem before it got out of hand. Because what we don't need are more Heaven's Gate cannibal zombies. Onyx said she liked the idea, and we spent some time talking about logistics and best practices. She asked if I could help establish the temple site, since that was not within the scope of her capabilities, and I said I would. I left Onyx to think about the details and to decide whether she wanted to be part of this or not. As I walked off, I looked over my shoulder and noticed Phoenix giving me an interesting look. Her brow furrowed and her eyes narrowed to dangerous slits. For someone who did not speak in words, her appearance was full of accusations. Yes, I have just given her girlfriend a full-time job. If Phoenix wants me to stay out of their business, she needs to say something about it. Point to Cougar. Your move, girl. I could play this game all day. And I think that's the last of the cannibal zombies. The Brotherhood, there might be some more mentioned down here somewhere. But that was pretty much the whole of it. I went hard on religion. I think it was appropriate. I think we have some serious problems in our near-term future. How long has this gone on? Can I check this? I can't even tell. Where do you get the time? Well, it doesn't matter. So what do you think? Did I nail it? Did I screw it up? I think that religious people have a different view of the world than I do, and that's fine. My view is not that important, to be honest. I'm a materialist, a scientist. I like to think I see the real world, and I like to think I am forced to think that me being so embedded in the real world is not an advantage, and being mired in abstractions like economics and politics and religion is not really a problem. These are just different perspectives. And where it becomes a problem is when things fall apart. And that's the point of the story, of this particular part of the story, this thread in the story. When things fall apart and reality intrudes, then you don't have the luxury of not dealing with reality. My fear, as I mentioned in the last video where I talk about death cults, is that people are not going to turn the corner. They're not going to set aside their relationship with abstractions. They're not going to say, wow, I've been living a life of faith and belief, and I believe in economics, and I believe in money, and I believe in jobs and economic growth and vacations and freedoms, and I believe in all these things, and I don't think people are going to recognize that those are just beliefs, because that's what they are. They are part of a contract. They are part of a social contract. They are part of a set of agreements, but it's just between humans. What's the value of money? What's the importance of a job? What's the importance of work? underneath all of these agreements, there is some reality. Your food really does come from somewhere. There really is a plot of dirt that someone put a seed in and watered the seed, and something came up and they harvested that thing and put it on a truck and sent it to the market. That really does happen. That's reality. But most people's relationship with that is they don't know those things. They just go to the market and buy the thing. They didn't see the field full of broccoli. They didn't see the broccoli seeds being put down. They just go and buy a head of broccoli and go home and eat it. And the same thing applies to the gallon of milk and the carton of eggs and the beef and the pork and the fish and all the processed foods, the crackers and the breakfast cereals and all the produce and all the nuts and all the everything. It's at the supermarket. But that's an abstraction. That's not reality. It only works as long as it works, folks. And then when it doesn't work, as I fear is likely to happen, when it doesn't work anymore, can people turn the corner and just say, well, that was fun while it lasted. Whatever that was, going to the store, going to work, getting a paycheck, having a credit card, swiping my credit card, getting a latte in the drive-thru at Starbucks, whatever that was, whatever all that was fun while it lasted. And now it's over. I'd like to think that people could have that conversation with themselves. Or if they can't, then they have people around them who are sufficiently aware of the situation that they can set them aside and say, look, you're losing your mind over something that's gone. The world as we have known it is finished. It's not coming back. There's never going to be produce in the stores. There's never going to be a store. There might be a farmer's market or something. There might be a market day when the farmers bring in their produce and they set up their tables and set up their stalls and they do the thing, and you can go there and you can buy a turnip and you can buy tomatoes and maybe you can even buy eggs, right? Buy chicks to start your own chickens at your house. Things you can do at the farmer's market. If we can get those working, if we can get those going again. But we're going to have a very different relationship with reality for any of that to happen. And right now, nobody has a relationship with reality. And that was the point I was trying to make in the story of the Brotherhood. I wasn't really focusing on the Brotherhood as being unique. They're just a symptom. Nobody has a relationship with reality. And the entire story, It Was 100 Days, is about people turning the corner. They actually do that. People like Onyx and Phoenix and Cougar and Nurse Macklemore and all the other denizens of the village, and they deliberately recognize. They make it a practice to recognize and to communicate with each other that it's over. And maybe in the early weeks there was some thought that it could come back somehow in some form, but at some point the neighbors simply recognized and maybe even had to speak clearly among themselves. It's over. It's not coming back. And when you're able to have that realization, it's over and it's not coming back, then you're ready. Maybe you're not able, but you're at least ready. You're primed to ask, well, then what comes next? Your answer might be nothing. And then we're death cults. Then we're dealing with death cults. There's nothing that comes next. But there could be another bunch of people that say, well, what comes next? Well, let's just call it survival. What do we need to survive? We need food, water, shelter. We need community. We need medicines. We need professionals like a Nurse Macklemore. We need teachers. We need to protect our women and children. We need tools so that we can do carpentry, and we need materials to build fences and rebuild our homes, and we need seeds, shovels, hoes, something for fertilizer. And we need to work the soil. We have work to do. We need to build the fences. We need to build the homes, and we need to find the wood and burn the wood and cook the food and cook the bread. And we have to have a mill to work to grind the wheat into flour and all these things. And it's that's turning the corner. That's when you've turned the corner. You've said, well, that was fun while it lasted, and now it's over, and now we turn the corner. We go do something else. Or there's the Brotherhood. And that's really the point of the story. That's another thing that can happen. Now, there is a third path. I mean, the Brotherhood are in the story because they're not dead. The villagers are in the story because they're not dead. Anyone who's dead is not in the story. That's how the story works. The story doesn't talk about the dead people. Where they went, how they got there, what happened to them, when they died, how they died, the bodies piled up in ditches. That never goes there. Because the dead tell no tales. They just don't. They can't have a story. So the cannibal zombies, at least they're in the story. That is a path. They did survive. What can you say? That happened. And the rest of the story is about people who are also surviving. So that's my book. That's reading from my book. I don't know how long that took forever. But that's about the cannibal zombies. It's a riff on my last video about death cults. Not quite the same thing, notice, but definitely adjacent, right? My thinking these days about death cults actually came about because of all this hoo-ha last September and October about the rapture. And events like that get me thinking, what is that about? And when I'm thinking about things, then I'm also integrating the collapse of civilization. And what's that going to look like? And how are these people who are jonesing for the rapture's coming, we're all going to go to heaven, all you little people are going to be down on the ground, we're going to be looking down and waving at you because we're up in heaven and we're waving at you, you sinners, we're all going to be up in heaven eating whatever manna or drinking ambrosia or whatever they do in heaven. I don't know what they do in heaven. We're going to be waving at you down there being punished, and all the retribution and the coming of the demons and the unsealing of the seals and the blowing of the trumpets and retribution, and you're going to be down there, we're going to be waving at you. And what is that? What is that? Who would want that? Who would want that for the world? Somebody wants that. What's that about? It got me thinking. I had already written about the Brotherhood and the zombie cannibals, and so I mentioned the Rapture. They're Rapturists, so I guess I was already thinking about that. And so there it is. And if you buy the book, you can read that whole thing again yourself. And if you would like to leave a comment on the video, please do so. I'd be interested in your thoughts. I don't know. It's pretty emotional stuff, right? I went hard. As I said I would. I went hard on the Brotherhood. I don't feel bad about that. I think people are just going to have to decide. Do it now while you have plenty of time to talk about it among yourself and your friends and your spiritual leaders. Talk to them. Go to church and, pull the leader aside and say, hey, I've been thinking about this. Maybe this rapture stuff isn't. What if it doesn't happen? What if civilization collapses and we get left behind? Or nobody gets raptured. I mean, that's a possibility. Maybe we're all sinners and none of us are going to be raptured. And then civilization ends and we're left behind. And are we prepared for that? What are we going to do? Can the church help us think about that? Can the church or the synagogue or the mosque or whatever? This is a big playground, right? We're in a big playground here. Is there anything that our community, which we are bound together currently, is there anything our community, our conscious community, our deliberate community, is there anything we should be talking about, thinking about? Should there be an end to civilization? And some of that, of course, can be caused by politics. Trump invading Venezuela, and who knows what Putin's going to do. And then Xi Jinping invades Thailand and probably rockets Japan, and North Korea rockets South Korea, and then all of a sudden end of civilization, and here we are. Sunday service, here we are. We're at the mosque, we're at the synagogue, here we are. The wheels just came off, and here we are. Well, what are we going to do? That's a conversation, people. You could have that conversation. Yeah, you're welcome. Yes, I brought that to your attention. You're welcome. That's my job. That's what I've been doing here. Buy the book. Read the book. Link in the description. There's a lot going on in the book. And I am probably inordinately proud of how I handled the Brotherhood. Because it was hard. I wanted to go hard on the Brotherhood, and I think I did. But I think I did okay. If you agree, let me know. I'd appreciate some support. And if you think I really screwed it up, well, then be specific. I'm a writer. I'm open to ideas. Be specific. Anyway, that's my book. Or 4 or 5 days of it. It was 100 days. There's a lot more in there. Yeah. And pick up a copy. Let me know what you think. I'm done here. Think about it. Think about it.